Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
At my mother-in-law's birthday party in Paris, there was no place for me. My husband laughed. "Oh, no one invited you." I just smirked. "All right, darling," and walked out. 20 minutes later, they were calling in a panic because I had canceled the banquet. I sat in a taxi, watching the rain trickle down the window. The Eiffel Tower glowed in the distance like a giant Christmas ornament, just as unreachable and unreal as my family life had become 15 minutes ago. My phone kept vibrating nonstop. 23 missed calls, my mother-in-law, father-in-law, sister-in-law, and of course, Santiago. Especially Santiago, 12 calls in the last 10 minutes. I silenced the phone and tucked it into my small black Chanel purse, the one my husband had given me for our anniversary. "To match your status," he had said at the time. Or maybe he had just been trying to soften me up before whatever he was planning. "Madam, where exactly?" The taxi driver asked in a typically Parisian accent. An elderly Arab man with kind eyes glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "Are you all right?" "Hotel Ritz, please," I answered in French, silently thanking my mother for insisting I go to a language-specialized school. "Oui, je vais bien." Yes, I'm fine. And strangely enough, I really was fine. It was as if the last drop had finally overflowed the cup, and the water simply spilled over, without splashing, without drama. I expected to feel pain, humiliation, rage, and surely they would come later. But right now, I was wrapped in an odd calmness, as if I were watching the scene from afar, as if it had happened to another woman, not to me, Beatriz Diaz, successful event planner, wife of Santiago Pasqual. It had all started an hour ago at the Jules Verne restaurant on the second floor of the Eiffel Tower. My mother-in-law Maria Pasqual's 60th birthday. An event I had spent the last 6 months preparing, investing not just my professionalism but a sincere hope to finally earn the approval of this cold woman. I had booked business-class flights for the whole family, reserved suites at the Ritz, coordinated a 7-course menu by a Michelin-starred chef, arranged a private tour of the Louvre with an art historian, a vintage yacht cruise on the Seine, and most importantly, a celebratory dinner with a panoramic view of nighttime Paris. The perfectionist in me had poured my heart into every detail. And the naive girl inside me still believed that a perfectly organized birthday would melt my mother-in-law's icy heart. I arrived at the restaurant a little later than everyone else, held up finalizing the surprise, a quintet from the Grand Opera who would perform Maria Pasqual's favorite aria at the end of dinner. A polished maitre d' in an impeccable tuxedo escorted me to the private room, but something felt off. My intuition, which had saved me countless times in business, was now screaming danger. Around the large round table, as if on a theater stage, sat the main characters of my life for the past 5 years. My husband Santiago, his mother Maria, the guest of honor in a couture gown, his father Antonio, always buried in business and his smartphone, his sister Natalia and her husband Silvio, a perfect magazine couple. And Miranda, Santiago's ex, whom I knew only from family albums and the occasional careless mention from my mother-in-law, Miranda this, Miranda that. A girl from their own world, with an impeccable pedigree, a grandmother's apartment in an elite district, and a distinguished family name. She sat next to Santiago, their shoulders brushing. She wore an emerald dress that accentuated her eyes, the same green eyes Santiago had. I remembered my mother-in-law's words. They would have had such beautiful children, all with our family's green eyes. She always looked at me, and my brown eyes, inherited from a humble nurse at a city clinic, with a barely concealed condescension. "Everyone in our family has green eyes, Beatrice. For 4 generations. A special genetic trait." On the table were 6 sets of silver cutlery, placed with geometric precision, exactly 6. There was no place for me. As if I had been erased from the script of this evening, of this family, of this life. I stopped, staring at Santiago in disbelief. The restaurant was warm, but I broke out in a cold sweat. Everyone fell silent, like actors awaiting the protagonist for the climax of a play. Maria lifted her champagne glass to her lips with a slight smile. Natalia smirked subtly behind her napkin. Where should I sit? I asked, hating the tremor in my voice. Me, who had survived the turbulent years of youth, who had started my business from a cardboard box of business cards before event manager was even a word. Now I stood frozen before these people. Santiago raised his eyebrows, feigning surprise, that same fake expression I had seen whenever he interacted with outsiders, as Maria called them. "Oh, Beatrice, no one invited you," he laughed, turning to the others. Miranda giggled, covering her mouth with a manicured hand. "Right, Mama?" Maria sipped her champagne and nodded with that same air of smug superiority she had worn when she first met me at their country estate 5 years ago. "This is a family celebration, Beatrice," her voice sweet as honey, yet full of glass shards. "You understand the family. 5 years of marriage and still not family. An outsider." Hundreds of snubs, glances, barbed comments. I had thought I could earn my place. A girl from a working-class neighborhood who had built a successful business from nothing during the chaotic 90s. I believed in hard work. Patience and hard work can move mountains, my grandmother used to say, kneading dough for pies in our tiny kitchen. I believed in it until I collided with the Pasqual's world, where pedigree mattered more than effort, where knowing which fork to use with oysters outweighed all personal achievements. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Miranda's slender hand brush Santiago's wrist. A ring sparkled on her finger, the same engagement ring I had seen in old photos from Santiago and Miranda's engagement a year before we met. It was just a temporary breakup, he had once explained. Now everything clicked into place. Temporary, meaning, until me. I looked at Santiago. After 5 years, I still couldn't read his eyes, but now I caught a glimpse of something. Fear, shame, or maybe relief. It didn't matter. In that moment, I realized I no longer loved him. Maybe I never truly had. Maybe I had just clung to a beautiful fairy tale. A prince in a white Mercedes, my friend Gloria used to joke. The prince turned out to be cardboard, the horse, least. Oddly enough, I didn't feel pain, but liberation, as if I had shrugged off a heavy backpack after 5 long years. "All right, darling," I smiled the same smile I used to smooth over issues with difficult clients, and turned toward the exit. Each step on the soft carpet felt lighter. "Beatrice," Santiago called after me, anxiety in his voice. Of course. He always feared scandals, feared tarnishing his reputation, Maria's favorite mantra. I turned and said in the calmest tone I could muster, "I'm working. We have a birthday to finish. I haven't forgotten. I'll see it through, as a professional." Their faces froze for a moment. They had expected a meltdown, tears, a scene. But my mother had taught me, never show weakness, especially to an enemy. Leaving the restaurant, I passed the maitre d', who looked at me questioningly. Descending to the first level of the tower, I sat down on a bench and pulled out my phone. 20 minutes, that's all it took to cancel everything. Every single thing I had so carefully prepared. My hands didn't tremble as I dialed my assistant. "Mateo, it's me. Remember Plan B we joked about before the trip? The if my mother-in-law completely loses it plan?" I gave a shaky laugh. "Activate it. Immediately. And make sure all deposit refunds go to my personal accounts." I hailed a taxi near the tower and gave the hotel address. We started moving, and I closed my eyes. One thought pulsed in my head. "All right, darling. Very well. As my grandmother used to say, if you dig a pit for someone else, you'll fall into it yourself. And revenge? It's a dish best served cold. And I had always been a good student. 5 years ago, I would have never imagined I'd be sitting in a Parisian taxi, tearing apart my mother-in-law's celebration with my own hands. Back then, in 2017, I had only my company's perfect celebration, a rented apartment, and the unshakable faith in myself instilled by my mother, a schoolteacher. We had survived tough times when my father left for a young bookkeeper from his factory. Beatrice, you have to understand, it's love. Things with your mother had long gone cold. But Mom didn't break. A real woman must always stand on her own 2 feet, she used to say, grading papers late into the night and tutoring to make ends meet. I etched those words into my soul. Maybe that's why I wasn't afraid to start my own business, even when yesterday's gangsters were turning into businessmen. Armed with just a pamphlet and a notebook of ideas, I went door to door to company offices. Planning a corporate New Year party? I'll make sure your employees remember it forever. My first clients came thanks to my persistence and talent, and then word of mouth spread. I organized birthday parties for nouveau riche kids, weddings for rich heiresses, and corporate events for major firms. My hallmark became personal attention, no templates, only bespoke solutions. By 35, I had my own office, a team of 15 people, and a solid reputation in the capital. I worked with big businessmen, and even a few celebrities. Personal life? There simply wasn't time. The rare romances always ended the same. Beatrice, you're too independent. There's no place for a man next to you. And then came the opening of the boutique Hotel Alejandro, owned by the prominent businessman Antonio Pasqual. Beatrice, you have to land this client, my deputy Margarita urged, a former university cultural studies professor. With his connections, we'll reach a whole new level. I won the contract, beating 5 competitors. 3 weeks of sleepless nights, and the event turned out so perfect it was covered in every glossy magazine. It was there, among Dom Perignon champagne and fine Declare oysters, that I met Santiago Pasqual. He approached me himself while I was checking on the dessert service, a signature seed buckthorn millefeuille. I see you're one of those who controls every little detail, he smiled, adjusting the cufflinks on his flawless shirt. In my business, there are no little details, I replied, momentarily distracted from giving instructions to a waiter. You know, my mother would agree with that, he laughed. I smiled in return, silently noting his green eyes, the delicate nose with a barely visible bump, and the dimple on his right cheek. Pedigreed, my grandmother would have said. A week later, he called me himself, having gotten my number from his father. Beatrice, would you like to have dinner tonight? His voice carried that effortless social ease you can't learn unless you're born into a certain world. I can't tonight, I have an event, I answered honestly. Tomorrow then? Tomorrow's full too. Maybe you could tell me when there might be an opening in your packed schedule. He teased lightly, but there was no malice in it, just a gentle humor. And suddenly, I felt like I was in an old movie. As if music started playing behind me, and the world became a little kinder, a little brighter. Thursday, at 7 p.m. He chose the restaurant. Then came a few more dinners, a theater night, an exhibition at the Garage Museum. Santiago turned out to be intelligent, well-read, and had a wonderful sense of humor. He managed the investment branch of the family business, though, as I would later realize, more for form's sake. The real decisions were made by his father, Antonio. Dad thinks I'm not tough enough for business, he once admitted after a bottle of red wine. Maybe he's right. I love art, travel, life, you understand? And I did, or at least, I thought I did. And your parents? What do they do? He asked that same evening. My mother's a teacher. My father was an engineer at a factory, but we're no longer in contact. Imagine that, real intelligentsia, he said with sincere admiration, and I melted. For the first time in years, I didn't have to justify my background. 3 months later, Santiago invited me to a family dinner at their country estate. The mansion resembled an English manor, complete with columns, a perfect lawn, and even a swan lake. I didn't know then that I was stepping into a lion's den. Maria met me dressed in a pearl gray Chanel suit, diamond earrings, and a matching bracelet sparkled with every movement. Tall, slender, with impeccable posture and a frozen smile, she looked me up and down. Beatrice, how lovely that you could come. Santiago has told us so much about you. The diminutive tone stung, as if I were a child or the hired help. Antonio was simpler, a firm handshake, an attentive gaze. I've heard about your company. They say it's the best in the capital. We try our best, I replied modestly. The dinner was tense. I could feel Maria studying my every move, every word. Beatrice, which fork do you use for fish? She asked casually at some point. Fortunately, I had learned etiquette early on in my career, working with the elite had demanded it. After dessert, Santiago stepped out to smoke with his father, leaving me alone with Maria. Not yet my mother-in-law, back then. Beatrice, she said, you're a smart woman. Why do you want my son? Excuse me? I almost choked on my tea. Santiago is a good boy but weak. He always has been. As a child, he hid behind my skirts. As a teenager, behind his father, now behind our money. He won't be your support. I love him, I said, stunned by her bluntness. Love, she chuckled. In my time, girls of your background didn't dare fall in love with boys from families like ours. In your time? I couldn't resist a jab. Her eyes narrowed. There were always those who lived differently. My father held a certain post in a certain ministry, she said meaningfully. We never stood in lines like some people. It was a declaration of war, though I didn't realize it then. I saw before me a woman from a different world, one to which my mother and I would never belong. What are you two talking about? Santiago asked, returning and wrapping his arm around my shoulders. About the past, darling, Maria slipped her mask of a gracious hostess back on. About our shared history. 2 months later, Santiago proposed. A 3-carat diamond sparkled on my finger, drawing admiring gasps from friends and colleagues. Are you sure? My mother asked when I showed her the ring. Their world is different, Beatrice. Santiago isn't like them, I protested passionately. He's different. My mother only shook her head but said nothing more. The wedding was lavish, with 300 guests. I organized it myself, refusing to hire a wedding planner. It was my chance to prove my worth to the Pasqual family. Maria watched my efforts with indulgent detachment, occasionally making suggestions. Beatrice, we don't invite journalists in our circle. Beatrice, those flowers are too simple. Beatrice, the menu must be approved by the French consultant. My mother sat quietly in a corner, modest and slightly lost in her new boutique dress. We didn't invite any of my relatives, only a couple of my closest friends, against 200 guests from Santiago's side. It'll be better this way, Santiago convinced me. Otherwise, they would feel uncomfortable among ours. I didn't argue. Head over heels in love, wearing a stunning Vera Wang dress, I truly believed it was the beginning of a new, happy chapter in my life. How wrong I was. 6 months after the wedding, I realized my life had turned into a never-ending battle for acceptance. Maria, with aristocratic persistence, continued to teach me manners. Antonio mostly ignored me, absorbed in business. Natalia, Santiago's sister, never missed an opportunity to remind me of my humble origins. Beatrice, those shoes are too flashy for you. Beatrice, you laugh too loudly. Santiago either didn't notice or pretended not to. They're just getting used to you, kitten, he would say when I tried to talk to him about his family's behavior. Then he would kiss me, shower me with expensive gifts, and I would once again believe that everything would eventually get better. Now, sitting in the Parisian taxi, I realized I had never been a naive girl, only someone desperate to believe in a fairy tale. A fairy tale that had crumbled to dust. My agency continued to flourish after the wedding. I didn't want to become a kept woman, as Maria subtly hinted. Santiago, darling, why does your wife need to work? It looks as if you can't provide for your family. But my business gave me more than just financial independence. It gave me a sense of self-worth I desperately needed in my new life. The Pasquals lived in their closed world, where I was admitted only reluctantly and only on special occasions. Thursday family dinners, where I always felt out of place. Meetings with influential people at the country club, where I was introduced quickly to Beatrice, Santiago's wife. Cocktail parties where I stood for hours with a champagne glass, not knowing how to engage with polished ladies discussing the latest trends in Portugal or their husbands' new yachts. "You work too much," Santiago often said. "My mother's worried you're neglecting your family duties." Family duties? I nearly choked on my coffee. Like what, exactly? "You know," he waved vaguely, "keeping the house, maintaining the atmosphere." We lived in a luxurious apartment in the city center, the kind I once dreamed of, but it wasn't really my apartment. Every piece had been selected by the designer Maria hired. I had suggested we move, buy something of our own, but Santiago always found excuses. "The view here is the best. And besides, it's a gift from my parents." I understood, he didn't want to leave his mother's shadow. Even from a distance, she controlled his every step. But the worst began when the topic of children arose. 1 year after the wedding, Maria started a steady campaign. "Beatrice," she said at a family dinner, "you're already 36. It's time to think about children. After 35, it's harder for women to conceive." "Santiago and I aren't planning yet," I answered. "I'm at a crucial stage in developing my business." "Business?" She raised an elegant eyebrow. "In our family, women don't work, Beatrice. They focus on children and husbands." I glanced at Natalia, sitting opposite me. Indeed, she didn't work. Instead, she engaged in charity and tennis, raising 2 children with the help of 3 nannies and a governess. "We have different views on life, Maria," I smiled. "In my family, women have always worked." "Yes, I know," she smiled back. "Your mother, if I recall, is a teacher. A very respectable profession." That "very respectable," with its subtle pause, cost me a sleepless night. I couldn't explain to Santiago why I was so upset. "Oh, come on, kitten," he said, flipping channels on the massive TV. "Mom's just a bit old-fashioned, from another generation." But I knew it wasn't about generations. Maria was well-educated, spoke 3 languages, and had a solid grasp of modern art. She simply believed there was no room in their world for someone like me. Time passed, and I buried myself in work. My agency signed bigger contracts. I traveled frequently to international exhibitions and conferences. Santiago and I saw each other less and less. He spent more time at his father's office and often came home late, reeking not just of cigarettes, but of women's perfume. I stayed silent, unwilling to cause a scene. All my friends envied my marriage. A beautiful home, luxurious jewelry, vacations in the Maldives and Portugal. "You hit the jackpot, Beatrice," said Gloria, my childhood friend. She didn't understand. A golden cage is still a cage. 3 years ago, I noticed Santiago becoming increasingly distant. He would sit for hours, staring out the window, swirling a glass of whiskey. We used to talk, argue, laugh. Now he seemed to live in another dimension. "What's happening to you?" I asked one evening when he refused the dinner I had personally cooked, letting the chef go home. "Nothing," he shrugged. "Just tired." "Santiago, this isn't just tiredness. It's something else." He sighed and looked at me, really looked at me for the first time in a long time. "My father's sick, Beatrice. Pancreatic cancer. Final stage." I was stunned. Antonio had always seemed indestructible, like a rock. "Why didn't you tell me?" "We didn't want anyone outside the family to know." "Only family. Only family." Those words again. I didn't know what to say. "I'm sorry," I finally managed. "Is there anything I can do to help?" Santiago shook his head. "Mama took care of everything, the best doctors, a clinic in Switzerland. But the prognosis isn't good." I hugged him, and for the first time in a long while, he didn't pull away. That night, we were close again, just like in the first months after our wedding. I thought that grief might bring us together, might finally make us a real family. But I was wrong. Antonio died 3 months later. The funeral was private, for immediate family only. I stood beside Santiago but felt like a shadow. Maria Pasqual, now a widow, carried herself with stoic dignity, as befitted a member of the old guard, not a single tear in public. After the funeral, everything changed. Santiago officially became the head of the family and the business, and an enormous burden fell onto his shoulders. Despite her widowhood, Maria had no intention of stepping aside. She spent long hours locked away with her son, discussing strategies and making decisions. I tried to support Santiago, but kept running into a wall of silence. He came home late, traveled constantly, and on the rare weekends he was home, he was irritable and withdrawn. Maybe we should take a break, I suggested. Go away together, just the two of us, to rest. This isn't the time for vacations, Beatrice, he cut me off. I have a business to keep afloat. I watched him slowly turn into a copy of his father, just as cold, just as hard, just as unreachable. And it terrified me. We grew further and further apart. I threw myself into work, he into the family empire. We barely spoke, barely traveled, barely touched. We simply existed side by side like two strangers. And then, 3 weeks ago, just before the trip to Paris, it happened. I came home earlier than usual. My team and I had just signed a major contract to organize a festival in a large city, and I was elated. I wanted to share the news with Santiago, even though he hadn't shown much interest in my work lately. At home, I heard his voice coming from his study. He was on the phone, speaking in a tone I hadn't heard in a long time, lively, tender. "Yeah, baby, I missed you too," he said, and the affection in his voice stabbed me in the chest. No, she doesn't know. Mama says we should wait for the trip to Paris, we'll sort everything out there. Are you sure about the baby? It's a big step. Okay, I understand. I love you. I froze at the door, unable to move. Something inside me shattered. I knew Santiago had become distant. But cheating? A child? And why Paris? I didn't storm into the room. I didn't scream or demand answers. Instead, I quietly went to the bedroom, closed the door, and sat on the edge of the bed, staring out at the rooftops. I thought about what to do. Raise hell? File for divorce? Pretend I hadn't heard a thing? The next day, I started tracking Santiago. It wasn't hard, we had shared iCloud accounts. I could see his location at any time. He would spend hours at a cafe, the very one where we had our first dates. Was it sentimentality or simply convenience? I began checking his phone while he slept. There were messages from a contact named M, cryptic and suggestive. "See you at the usual place, can't stop thinking about you, soon everything will change." I found no replies from Santiago, he must have deleted them. A week later, I took a desperate step. I asked my friend Pablo, a computer genius, to recover the deleted messages from Santiago's phone. It was illegal. It was unethical. But I had to know the truth. Pablo delivered. He sent me a file with the restored conversations. I read it late one evening, sitting alone in my office. The shock nearly crushed me. M was Miranda, Santiago's former fiancée, the one Maria used to mention so casually. They had rekindled their relationship right after Antonio's death, almost a year ago. Miranda was now pregnant, 2 months along. And Maria, she knew. Worse, she was pulling the strings like an experienced puppeteer. Mama says Beatrice might cause a scene if we announce the divorce here. She suggests doing it in Paris, at her birthday. Everyone will be there, and you can officially return to the family. We'll deal with Beatrice afterward when we get back. I read and reread those words, my fury rising. They planned to humiliate me, abandon me in a foreign country, for what? So Santiago could return to his proper place, with the right fiancée, carrying his child. The worst part of betrayal isn't the pain. It's the act of pretending you know nothing, living side by side with someone plotting to destroy your life. Eating at the same table. Watching the same television. Sleeping in the same bed. Though in those last weeks before Paris, we barely touched at all. And through it all, I had to smile, to discuss the details of the upcoming birthday, to pretend I was looking forward to the trip. I had long since learned, the best mask is work. I organized the celebration as if my life depended on it. In a way, it did. Beatrice, there's no need to be so thorough, Maria said when I showed her yet another draft of the dinner menu. It's just a family gathering. Family. That word she wielded like a weapon. It's your birthday, Maria, I smiled back. It should be perfect. For a brief moment, something like respect flickered in her eyes, and then disappeared. As you wish, Beatrice. You're the professional, after all. Our professional, as if I still belonged to them. As if they weren't planning to dispose of me in a foreign city. Santiago grew visibly more anxious as the flight approached. Twice, I caught him talking on the phone in the bathroom with the water running. 3 times, he didn't come home, claiming urgent business. I asked no questions, I already had all the answers. Instead, I finalized my plan. Mateo, my deputy, a former military officer who had become an event planner after being discharged, had once told me, Beatrice, business is like war. Always have an exit strategy. Since then, I always had a plan B for every event. What if the weather changed? What if twice as many guests arrived? What if the main course didn't show up? This time, plan B was special. I arranged for all birthday expenses to go through my personal card, not the company account. I negotiated contracts with cancellation clauses up to 24 hours before the event. I made copies of every document, ticket, reservation, and invoice, storing them in a private folder on my personal laptop, the one I never let out of my sight. And most importantly, I rehearsed what I would say, how I would act, when the moment came. No tears. No scenes. Just cold, calculated revenge. The day before the flight to Paris, I met with my mother. We hadn't seen each other in a while. She didn't like coming to our apartment, she felt out of place there, and I rarely went back to the old neighborhood. She welcomed me into the same modest apartment where I had grown up. The small kitchen, the smell of cabbage pies, the geraniums on the windowsill, it all felt so warm, so familiar. Something's wrong, Beatrice? She asked, pouring tea into the old porcelain cups passed down from my grandmother. My mother always sensed my moods. What makes you think that? I tried to sound light. Your eyes are sad, she said, gently stroking my hand. I'm your mother. I see it. And I broke down. I told her everything, about Santiago's betrayal, Miranda's pregnancy, the Pasqual family's plan to publicly humiliate me in Paris. She listened silently, squeezing my hand tighter and tighter. Are you going to leave him? She asked when I finished. Yes, I nodded. But first, I want to teach them a lesson. I told her about my plan. She stayed quiet for a long time, then sighed. You've always been a fighter, Beatrice, just like your father. It was the greatest praise she could give me. Whatever happens, she added, remember, this is your home. You can always come back. I hugged her tightly, inhaling the familiar scent of chamomile shampoo and the perfume she reserved for special occasions. I know, Mama. Thank you. That evening, back home, I called Mateo and told him about Plan B, which by then had become my Plan A. Are you sure, Beatrice? He asked after I explained everything. It could hurt the agency's reputation. I've thought it through, Mateo. Formally, we're not breaching any contracts, just rearranging the timeline. He paused, then said, They deserve it, Beatrice. I'm with you. The next morning, we flew to Paris. Santiago was tense but tried to hide it. Maria behaved as always, condescending and cold. Natalia and her husband kept their distance, whispering and casting glances my way. I smiled and focused on my work, one last time. Paris welcomed us with gray skies and a light drizzle. I had always loved this city, its graceful beauty, its unhurried rhythm, its quiet certainty of its own perfection. Now it seemed even more beautiful. Perhaps because I knew it would be my last trip with the Pasquals. We checked into the Ritz, the famous hotel where kings and presidents had stayed. Maria and Santiago got the suites with views over Place Vendôme. Natalia and her husband, slightly less luxurious rooms overlooking the courtyard. I was given a standard room facing a neighboring building. "Sorry, kitten, all the best rooms were taken," Santiago said. "You don't mind, do you?" "Of course not, darling," I smiled. "I'll be working most of the time anyway." The birthday celebrations began the next day. A private tour of the Louvre in the morning. Lunch at Le Grand Vefour. An afternoon stroll through Montmartre. Dinner at a newly Michelin-starred bistro. I stayed slightly apart, the organizer, not the guest. I watched Santiago whispering to his mother, Natalia throwing triumphant glances my way. I knew Miranda was somewhere in Paris, maybe even staying in this very hotel, just waiting to take my place. But I kept smiling, kept working, and waited for my moment. The grand finale would be the celebratory dinner at the Eiffel Tower. I had personally chosen the Jules Verne restaurant for its panoramic views and impeccable cuisine. Booked the best table. Approved a special menu. Arranged a performance by musicians. Everything had to be perfect. I spent the entire day checking every last detail, calling the restaurant, meeting the florist, finalizing arrangements with the musicians. By 7 p.m., when the celebration was scheduled to begin, I felt a slight weariness but was filled with determination. I returned to the hotel to change. Hanging in the wardrobe was a black Alexander McQueen dress I had bought especially for this evening, strict, elegant, with an unusual cutout on the back. I slipped it on, applied discreet makeup, and gathered my hair into a simple yet graceful bun. In the mirror, I saw a confident woman, ready for the final act. When I descended to the lobby, no one from the Pasqual family was there. Strange, we had agreed to meet at 7:30 to go to the restaurant together. I checked my phone, no messages. I decided to wait 10 minutes, then called Santiago. No answer. I dialed Natalia. Nothing. A bad feeling crept over me. Could it be? Had they really left without me, choosing to start the humiliation right now? I approached the concierge. "Excuse me, have you seen the Pasqual family?" They were supposed to meet in the lobby. "Yes, madam," he replied with impeccable politeness. "They left about 20 minutes ago. They ordered a taxi to the Eiffel Tower. So they really had gone without me." I felt a lump rise in my throat, but I immediately suppressed the emotion. Not now. I needed to stick to the plan. "Could you order a taxi for me as well, please?" I asked the concierge. "To the Eiffel Tower." 20 minutes later, I was riding the high-speed elevator up to the second level of the tower, where the restaurant was located. My heart was pounding, not from fear, but from resolve. I knew exactly what awaited me, and exactly what I would do. The door to Jules Verne restaurant slid open silently, and I stepped inside. The luxurious hall with its panoramic windows overlooking the evening city was filled with elegant Parisians and wide-eyed tourists. The maitre d', in a flawless tuxedo, greeted me at the entrance. "Good evening, madam. Do you have a reservation?" "I'm here for the Pasqual table," I answered in French. "It's Madame Pasqual's birthday. I'm the event organizer." He checked his list and nodded. "Of course. Please, follow me." I walked behind him between the tables, surrounded by the soft murmur of voices, the clinking of glasses, and faint music. Deep in the hall, I spotted them, my almost family. They were gathered around a large round table by the window with a view of the Arc de Triomphe. The best table, the one I had reserved 3 months ago. Maria sat at the head of the table in a refined dark blue dress, a string of pearls around her neck. To her right was Santiago, to her left, Natalia with her husband, and another woman, Miranda, the same Miranda I'd heard so many stories about. They hadn't noticed me yet, too engrossed in their conversation, too comfortable in their aristocratic little world. I paused for a moment, studying their faces. They looked happy, like a real family. A family I had never truly been part of. Finally, Santiago looked up and saw me. His expression changed. The slight smile disappeared, replaced by nervousness. He leaned toward his mother and whispered something. Maria turned her head, and our eyes met, cold, assessing, as always. I approached the table. Natalia and her husband fell silent. Miranda nervously tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Only Maria remained composed. And where should I sit? I asked, glancing around the table, though I already knew the answer. Santiago exchanged a glance with his mother, then said with exaggerated surprise, "Oh, Beatrice, no one invited you." Those words struck harder than I expected. 5 years of marriage, 5 years of trying to become part of this family, and it all ended with that one line, delivered with casual cruelty. But I didn't show my pain. Instead, I smiled calmly, professionally, just as I had smiled at hundreds of demanding clients. "All right, darling," I said, and turned away. "Beatrice," Santiago called after me as I was already walking away. "Where are you going?" There was worry in his voice, not for me, but for the scene I might cause, the damage to their perfect reputation. I turned back to him. "To work. We have a birthday to finish, remember?" I didn't wait for their reaction. With quick, steady steps, I left the restaurant, descended to the first level, and found a quiet corner near the souvenir shop. My hands trembled slightly as I pulled out my phone. I took a deep breath. This wasn't the time for emotions, it was time for action. The first call was to Mateo. "Beatrice, how did it go?" he asked, genuine concern in his voice. "Just as we expected, Mateo," I said. "Launch the plan." "Already done," he replied. "I was waiting for your call as the signal." "Good. Now for the next phase." I started dialing numbers. First, the restaurant administrator. "Monsieur Dupont? This is Beatrice Diaz, organizer of Madame Pasqual's birthday. Unfortunately, due to unforeseen circumstances, the event is canceled." "Yes, I understand it's unusual. Of course, we will pay the cancellation fee according to our agreement, but payment will be released only after confirmation from the bank." "No, not within 3 days as usual, only after verification." Next, the florist who was supposed to deliver giant bouquets of orchids during dessert. "Madame Bouchard? This is Beatrice from Perfect Celebration Agency. Regarding the order for the Eiffel Tower, I'm very sorry, but we must cancel. Of course, we'll pay for the work you've already done, but again, payment will be delayed until new guarantees from the client are received." Then the musicians. Then the hotel brunch booking for the day after. Each time, I apologized, promised compensation, but firmly stated that funds would only be released after new client guarantees. Given that all the contracts were signed in my name and all payments routed through my accounts, I knew they wouldn't be able to resolve anything quickly. 20 minutes later, I had made all the calls. My phone started to explode with incoming calls, Santiago, Maria, even Natalia. I didn't answer. I just watched the missed call counter climb, 10, 15, 20. I caught a taxi back to the hotel, went up to my room, and began packing. I moved methodically, like a machine. Documents into carry-on. Laptop too. Clothes into the suitcase. Cosmetics into the travel bag. The Alexander McQueen dress, I carefully hung it back in the wardrobe, a souvenir for them. When everything was packed, I called the front desk. "Good evening. This is Mrs. Pasqual from room 342. I need a taxi to Charles de Gaulle Airport and my bill prepared, please." I'll be down in 15 minutes. I put the phone down and looked around one last time. The room was cold and soulless, like my entire life with the Pasquals. I felt no sadness, no regret, only a strange, light relief. For the first time in years, I could breathe freely without the crushing weight of someone else's expectations. A knock came at the door, sharp, insistent. I knew it was Santiago. No one else would pound like that. "Beatrice, open up now. I know you're in there." I approached the door but didn't open it. "What do you want, Santiago? What the hell have you done? The restaurant says the banquet's canceled, the musicians, the food, everything. What's going on?" "I think you should discuss that with your mother," I said calmly. "And with Miranda. Congratulations on the baby, by the way." There was silence behind the door. Then Santiago spoke again, his tone now low and pleading. "Beatrice, listen, you've got it all wrong. Let's talk like adults. Please open the door." "There's nothing to talk about, Santiago. For 5 years, I tried to be part of your family. For 5 years, I endured your mother's humiliation. For 5 years, I turned a blind eye to your affairs. It's over. If that's how you want it," his voice hardened, "I'll destroy your business. One call from me, and no one in our city will hire your agency again." I laughed quietly. "Try it. But first, explain to your mother why her birthday party became a disaster. And to your friends, why they'll have to find a new event planner. And to the press, who adore scandals among high society. You'll regret this," he spat. "Doubt it," I replied calmly. "Now if you'll excuse me, my taxi is waiting." I grabbed my suitcase, my bag, and stepped out. Santiago was standing in the corridor, disoriented, furious, his face flushed. In his eyes, I saw no sorrow, only rage. Rage that his plans were collapsing, that his reputation was at risk, that he had lost control. "Don't do this, Beatrice," he hissed. "Goodbye, Santiago," I said, walking past him to the elevator. "Say hello to your mother for me." On the plane home from Paris, I finally allowed myself to relax. Business class, a glass of champagne, dimmed lights. None of the passengers around me knew that the woman by the window had just staged a quiet revolution in her life. My phone kept vibrating in my bag. I didn't even look. I could imagine the messages, threats from Santiago, cold fury from Maria, maybe even tantrums from Natalia. I didn't care. For the first time in a very long time, I felt free. I pulled out my tablet and opened my email. Mateo's message was at the top of the inbox. "Beatrice, everything executed exactly as planned. Yacht canceled. Hotel brunch canceled. Driver reassigned. Versailles guide informed of the emergency. All payments frozen. Refunds redirected to your reserve account, as you instructed. P.S. You're a genius." I smiled. Mateo had always been dependable, the kind of person you could call to bury a body if needed. Not that it would ever come to that, it wasn't my style. My revenge was elegant and perfectly legal. Smirking, I typed a reply. "Thank you, Mateo. I'll be in the office by noon tomorrow. Please prepare the divorce and asset separation documents and find me a good lawyer, someone who won't be intimidated by the Pasqual name." I shut down the tablet and looked out the window. Below, the clouds drifted by, like whipped cream, like a landscape from a child's fairy tale. I suddenly remembered my mother reading me The Snow Queen by Andersen at bedtime. The story of a girl saving a boy from an icy prison. Except this time, I was saving myself, and the ice around my heart was finally beginning to melt. The plane landed at 4:30 in the morning. The capital greeted me with its familiar bustle and cold April rain. I took a taxi to my mother's apartment. I couldn't bring myself to return to that other place, that place that had never really been my home. Despite the early hour, my mother was awake. She met me at the door, wrapped in a fluffy robe, a steaming cup of tea in her hands, and asked no questions. Spend the night here and then decide what to do next, my mother said, helping me take off my coat. Your room is waiting for you. My room, it hadn't changed since I moved in with Santiago. The same desk by the window, the same bookshelf. The same old carpet, worn in the spot where I loved to sit cross-legged and read. Here, I didn't have to pretend. Here, I was real. I unpacked only the essentials, took a hot shower, and wrapped myself in my mother's old bathrobe before stepping into the kitchen. She was ladling steaming soup, my favorite childhood dish, into bowls. Tell me everything, she said simply, sitting across from me. And so I told her about the birthday, how I had canceled everything, how I left the hotel while Santiago pounded on the door demanding explanations. And now? My mother asked after listening carefully. Now divorce, I replied, and work. Lots of work. I'm proud of you, she said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. You did the right thing. In her eyes, I saw something I had never seen in Maria Pasqual's unconditional acceptance and love. At that moment, my phone vibrated again. I pulled it from my bag. Time to face reality. 47 missed calls from Santiago. 23 from Maria Pasqual. And dozens of messages. I opened the first. Beatrice, do you even realize what you've done? Mom's hysterical. The restaurant is demanding full payment. The hotel is threatening eviction. Call me back immediately. The second was even more vicious. If you think you can treat our family this way and get away with it, you're very mistaken. My lawyer is already preparing a lawsuit. Answer your damn phone. The third was from Maria, as cold as the woman herself. Beatrice, your behavior is disgraceful. I always knew you lacked true nobility. I hope you realize you've closed every door to decent society for yourself. I silently showed the messages to my mother. She shook her head. Even now they don't understand what you felt. They never will. I shrugged. To them, I had always been an outsider. Just then, my phone started ringing again. Santiago's name flashed on the screen. I looked at my mother. Answer, she said. Say everything you need to say. End it. I pressed the button and put the call on speaker. Yes, Santiago. Beatrice, finally. His voice was hoarse, as if he hadn't slept all night. Do you realize what's happening here? We're being thrown out of the hotel. The restaurant's preparing a lawsuit. Mom is in such a state that... Santiago, I interrupted calmly, I don't care what's happening to you in Paris. What do you mean, you don't care? He gasped indignantly. You ruined my mother's birthday. You disgraced our entire family. Do you have any idea who you've crossed? I do, I said, just as calmly. I crossed people who've humiliated me for 5 years, treated me like a second-class citizen, and then plotted to publicly shame me in a foreign country. I think this is fair retribution. So that's what this is about, he said, his voice raw with anger. You did all this out of revenge? Because of your stupid complexes and wounded pride? No, Santiago, I smiled. I did it because I'm a professional. I organized your mother's birthday, signed the contracts, paid the deposits. I had every right to change the arrangements at any time. All documents were in my name, all agreements were mine. Technically, I simply postponed the event. Postponed? You canceled everything, the yacht, the tours, even the damn brunch at the hotel. I postponed them, I said, savoring every word, until a more appropriate date. When your mother learns basic manners. Which, frankly, may never happen. So let's just say the birthday has been indefinitely postponed. There was silence on the line. Then I heard shuffling, muffled voices. It seemed Maria had taken the phone. Beatrice, her voice was unusually restrained. I understand that you're upset, but what you did, this isn't just petty. It's criminal. What crime exactly, Maria? I asked sweetly. I did my job. I organized the event. Plans changing last minute is normal in our business. Force majeure, you know. You know what I mean. She snapped, her voice trembling with rage. Because of you, my reputation. Because of me? I laughed softly. No, Maria. Because of yourself. Because you never accepted me as your equal. Because you planned to humiliate me in front of everyone. Because you encouraged your son to cheat on me with his ex. That's nonsense, she exclaimed, but her voice lacked conviction. Santiago would never. Read his messages with Miranda, I suggested. Especially the ones where they discuss announcing the divorce at your birthday and the baby she's expecting, and how you all planned it together. There were more muffled voices, sharp gasps. My words had hit like a bomb. Apparently, Maria hadn't known about Miranda's pregnancy. Beatrice, it was Santiago again, panic in his voice. Listen, let's talk like adults. I admit, it was a mistake. No, Santiago, I said firmly. No more talking. From now on, we communicate only through lawyers. I'm filing for divorce. And when you get home, don't look for me at our apartment. I only took my things. The apartment is all yours. You can move Miranda in if your mother approves, of course. I hung up without waiting for a reply. The phone immediately started ringing again. I switched it off and placed it on the table. My mother looked at me with pride. You know, she said, just now, you reminded me of my own mother. She never let anyone walk over her, not during the war, not during famine, not even when Grandpa was arrested. She always stood tall. I felt tears sting my eyes. I miss Grandma, I whispered. She would have understood you, my mother said, wrapping her arms around me. And she would be proud of you. Just like I am. We sat like that, wrapped in each other's arms, in the old kitchen, as the first light of dawn began to creep through the window. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly at home. The next day, I went to the office. Despite the early hour, Mateo and my deputy Margarita were already there. They greeted me like a hero, with champagne, flowers, and a cake that read, "Welcome back, boss." Beatrice, Mateo said, handing me a folder. Everything you asked for is here, the divorce contacts, preliminary documents, bank statements, and a report on what happened in Paris. Tell me, I said, settling into my chair, feeling, for the first time in a long time, that I was right where I belonged. The Pasquals tried to fix things on the spot, Mateo said, barely hiding his satisfaction. They offered huge sums to the restaurant, the hotel, every vendor. But Paris doesn't work like that. There are rules, especially for elite establishments. All contracts were with the agency. All deposits went through your accounts. Without your personal confirmation, no one lifted a finger, even for triple the payment. And what did they do? I asked, unable to hide my smile. Rumor has it, there was quite a scene at the Eiffel Tower. Maria had a meltdown. Security had to intervene. The next day, they were asked to vacate the hotel, payment issues, they said. They moved to another hotel, same story. In the end, the entire delegation had to fly home, but not in business class, as planned. Economy. And strangely, all their credit cards stopped working that day. Margarita chuckled. The French are masters of polite sabotage, especially when someone breaks the rules of decorum. I shook my head. You know, I don't feel any malice. Just a sense of closure, like a chapter that dragged on for 5 years has finally ended. Don't worry about repercussions, Beatrice, Mateo said seriously. We did everything correctly from a legal standpoint. They have no grounds to sue. Your personal and business accounts are safe. And what about the business? I asked, remembering Santiago's threats. Could they still hurt us? Unlikely, Margarita shook her head. They're in a tough spot themselves. Word about the Paris disaster has already leaked into high society circles. And you know how much our capital loves a good scandal. I nodded. She was right. In the Pasqual's world, reputation mattered more than money. And the story of a nobody outwitting Maria Pasqual would hurt them more than any lawsuit. Well then, I straightened in my chair. Let's get back to work. We have plenty of clients waiting for attention. One more thing, Mateo added hesitantly. Business and Style magazine called. They want to feature you in their Successful Women of the Country column. They said they've been following your career for a while. I smiled. Let them coordinate with my PR manager. I'll think about it. After the team meeting, I stayed alone in my office. I turned my phone back on. 78 missed calls, mostly from Santiago and the Pasquals, but some from clients, journalists, and friends. It didn't matter. I decided to change my number, a clean slate. A week later, my mother called. Beatrice, someone came by from Santiago. Who? I tensed. Some distinguished man in a suit. Said he was a lawyer. Brought divorce papers and some other documents. I didn't accept them. Told him everything would go through your lawyer. You did the right thing, I smiled. Looks like they're surrendering without a fight. More like trying to avoid a scandal, my mother said wisely. But be careful, Beatrice. People like Maria Pasqual hold grudges for a long time. So do I, Mama, I said quietly. So do I. The next day, my lawyer, a sharp-eyed, silver-haired bulldog of a man, brought the documents to my office. They're offering a quick, quiet divorce, he said, laying them out. You keep your business and personal accounts. They keep everything else. No mutual claims. No alimony. No court proceedings. And what do you think? I asked, flipping through the papers. I think this is the best deal you could get, he shrugged. Fighting the Pasquals could drag on for years, cost you nerves and money. This way, it's a clean break. You're free. Free. That word sounded like music. I signed the papers without hesitation. My lawyer gathered them up and left me alone. I walked to the window, gazing out at the city from the height of the business center. The city stretched endlessly in all directions, huge, noisy, full of opportunities. My city. The place where I started from scratch, built my business, met Santiago, and now, where I would begin my new life. My phone rang. It was Margarita. Beatrice, we have a new client. They want to organize the opening of a contemporary art gallery at the Windsavad. The budget is impressive. Perfect, I said. Schedule the meeting for tomorrow. I'll handle this project personally. There's something else, Margarita's voice held a smile. I just heard a story. Apparently, Maria Pasqual threw a scandalous fit at a private dinner, yelling at her son in front of the entire restaurant. She screamed that he had disgraced the family by getting involved with a provincial girl, and that Miranda, it turns out, is actually pregnant by some Italian count she was having an affair with. I laughed. Our high society world never ceased to amaze me. Looks like your divorce won't be the only one in the Pasqual family, Margarita continued. Maria Pasqual forbade her son from even thinking about Miranda and is already searching for a new fiancé from a proper family. And Miranda? I asked with unintentional curiosity. They say she disappeared. Maybe she moved to Italy with her count, or maybe she's hiding somewhere here. You know how it is, our city is built on rumors. Poor Santiago, I shook my head. He'll never escape her control. But you did, Margarita said with real admiration. And you know what? I'm proud to work with you. After the call, I stood at the window for a long time, watching as the city slipped into twilight. The night lit up the capital with thousands of lights, beautiful, alluring, full of life. Somewhere out there, in one of the luxury mansions, Maria Pasqual was surely hatching new plans for her son. Somewhere in a fashionable bar, Santiago was probably drowning his sorrow. And me? I was free. Free from humiliation, free from the need to constantly prove my worth, free from emotional dependency. 5 years in a golden cage were over. And even though the final straw had been that humiliating moment at the Eiffel Tower, true liberation had come much earlier, the day I decided I had had enough. As my grandmother used to say, God endured, and so must we. Well, I had endured enough. 1 year after the Paris scandal, I was sitting on the terrace of my new home. A small, cozy cottage overlooking pine trees and a river, my refuge, my sanctuary, a place I had built for myself. After the divorce, I sold my share of the city apartment. To my surprise, Santiago didn't oppose it. I invested the money into this house. There were no marble columns or golden toilets like in the Pasqual mansion, but there was light, air, and peace. The perfect celebration agency didn't suffer after the Pasqual scandal, quite the opposite. It gained new clients. The story of how I put arrogant oligarchs in their place quickly spread through certain circles, thanks in large part to Margarita, who knew just how to drop the right word in the right ear. Suddenly, I became something of an urban legend, the woman who dared to stand against the system. Of course, there were those who criticized me, calling me an upstart who challenged the old guard. But I had long understood, you can't please everyone. The most important thing is to remain true to yourself. That day, my mother came to visit. Since the divorce, she seemed 10 years younger, standing taller, caring for herself, even enrolling in a foreign language course. Tea on the veranda? I asked, meeting her at the gate. With pleasure, she kissed my cheek. I brought your favorite cabbage pastries. We settled into wicker chairs, and I poured tea into porcelain cups, the same ones my grandmother had once given to my mother, and now they were mine. How are things at school? I asked, breaking off a piece of pastry. Can you believe it? I was appointed deputy headmaster, she smiled. At my age. You're still young, I squeezed her hand. And the best teacher I know. She looked at me with a long, searching gaze. And you, Beatrice? Are you happy? I thought about it. Am I happy after everything, the betrayal, the humiliation, the divorce? You know, I said finally, I don't think happiness is a permanent state. It's moments. Like now, sitting here, drinking tea with you, eating your pastries, I'm definitely happy. She smiled. My little philosopher. I'm also happy when I finish a difficult project, when I walk through the forest early in the morning, when I read a good book before bed. So, you don't regret the divorce or how everything turned out? I shook my head. Not for a second. You know, Mom, there are relationships that make you stronger, and there are ones that drain you. My marriage to Santiago belonged to the second category. I tried so hard to fit in, to be accepted by their circle, that I almost lost myself. I noticed, she said quietly. You were changing, becoming someone else, especially in those last couple of years. I felt it too, as if I wore a mask every morning and couldn't take it off at night. The wind rustled through the trees, somewhere in the distance children's laughter echoed, neighbor boys racing their bikes along the forest path. What happened to him? My mother asked suddenly. Santiago? I sighed. Rumor has it, he eventually married Miranda despite Maria's protests and the scandal over the supposed paternity of an Italian count. A DNA test confirmed the child was his after all. They bought a house abroad and hardly ever returned home. Apparently, Miranda demanded a complete break with his mother, and surprisingly, Santiago agreed. Amazing, my mother shook her head. Who would have thought he had it in him? Love works miracles, I shrugged. Or maybe fear of loneliness. Who knows? And you? My mother asked carefully. Aren't you afraid of being alone? I smiled. I'm not alone, Mom. I have you, my work, my friends. And as for love, if I ever meet someone, it'll be a completely different story, without worrying about background, status, or emerald family eyes. She laughed. Oh, those eyes. I remember Maria at your wedding, explaining to all the guests about the family trait. And how she told me, it's a pity your grandchildren will probably have brown eyes, it's a dominant gene. I forgot about that, I laughed too. What nonsense. We finished our tea, and I suggested we walk down to the river. The day was warm, scented with pine resin and blooming linden. Has it really been a whole year? My mother mused as we walked among the tall pines. It feels like you just returned from Paris yesterday. Time flies. I nodded. You know what's funny? I recently organized a birthday party for a banker's wife. Guess where? No. Not at the Eiffel Tower? Her eyes widened. Exactly. Same restaurant. And everything went perfectly, no drama, no scandals. Just a beautiful celebration for people who know how to appreciate beauty. Fate loves to close circles, she said philosophically. We reached the river and sat on a bench. The sun played across the water, and a boat floated by in the distance. What do you think Grandma would say now? My mother asked suddenly. I thought of my grandmother, a woman who had survived war, hunger, and depression, yet never lost her cheerfulness or her faith in people. I think she'd say, God stands by the honest and the brave, I replied, remembering her favorite saying. And, better a bit of truth than a sweet lie, added my mother. We fell silent, each lost in our own thoughts. I thought about the path I had traveled in the last year, from a woman willing to endure humiliation for the status of being a Pasqual, to a woman who valued herself and wasn't afraid to defend her boundaries. By the way, I never told you, my mother said, breaking the silence. Maria Pasqual called me. What? I almost choked. When? Why? About a month ago, she said calmly. She wanted to know how to reach you. Said your number had changed. And what did you tell her? I tensed inside. I said you didn't want any contact with their family, she answered simply. And if she had any legal matters, she should go through your lawyer. And? She said it wasn't about legal matters. She wanted to apologize. I sat in stunned silence. Maria Pasqual, apologizing? It didn't seem real. She said she's rethought many things over the past year, my mother continued. Lost her son, left alone in that big house. Realized she had been unfair to you. Do you believe her? I asked, still shocked. I don't know, she answered honestly. But she sounded broken. Not the Iron Lady I remember from your wedding. I shook my head. Even if it's true, some bridges can't be rebuilt, Mom. Too much pain, too much betrayal. I don't hold a grudge, but I don't want any contact either. I told her the same, my mother nodded. And surprisingly, she said, I understand. In her place, I would do the same. We sat silently again. I thought of Maria Pasqual, the proud, imperious woman, and wondered if life truly could change a person that much, or if it was just another manipulation. Let's leave the past in the past, I said finally. I have a new life now, and I don't want to waste a minute on regrets or resentment. Right, my girl, my mother hugged me. As your grandmother used to say, don't look back, you might trip. That evening, after seeing my mother off, I stayed alone in my home. I lit candles, poured a glass of red wine, and stepped onto the terrace. Dusk was falling over the forest, jasmine scented the air, the jasmine I planted last fall by the porch. I thought about how strange life could be. Sometimes you have to lose something important to find yourself. Go through pain to grow stronger. Face betrayal to learn the value of true loyalty. I regretted nothing, not meeting Santiago, not the 5 years of marriage, not even that final humiliation at the Paris restaurant. It was all part of my journey, lessons I had to learn. Tomorrow, I had an important meeting. A major international company wanted me to organize a series of events in the capital. Lunch with Margarita was scheduled too. She had just returned from Italy and promised to show me photos. And later, a language lesson. I decided to learn a new language, just because I could. And over the weekend, a trip with my mother to visit her old teacher friends, a small literary salon they had started. My life was full, vibrant, and most importantly, truly mine. No longer living for anyone else's approval. No longer trying to fit someone else's mold. I raised my glass, gazing at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. To freedom, I whispered. To the right to be myself. Far in the distance, I heard the faint hum of an electric train, the same one I once took into the city as a young student, full of hopes and fears. Who could have imagined where that path would lead? But as my grandmother used to say, the road is mastered by the one who walks it. And I had always loved walking with my own 2 feet.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.